Hi, Deb here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how I knew that I had a food addiction because I hear from so many people who struggle with overeating and obsessing about food all the time who have a total aversion to the word addiction. And I completely relate to that because that was me too. I did not identify that way. And frankly, I think I thought that people who had an addiction or people who couldn't get it together. And I was someone who prided myself on feeling like I always looked together. And so it was something that I didn't even really know what addiction was. I didn't know what food addiction was. I just knew that I didn't have it. And so, what I want to share here today is how the 5 things that had me really realizing that I did have a food addiction. And I also want to share some really important thoughts with you about that that I will share at the end. And hopefully, this discussion will just help you to get more clarity on your own struggle and your own path. So, that's the intention here. And so, just as I start here, I think the very first thing that had me knowing that I had a food addiction was simply finding out what food addiction really is, and what it's not actually. Um, you know, I think if someone were to ask me what I thought food addiction was, I probably would have said it's when you can't stop eating sugar or bread or something like that. But I really didn't actually know. And um, learning what food addiction really is was a total game changer for me because it took away some of the shame that I had or some of the judgment that I had around, this just means that I'm lazy and I lack discipline. And I think the biggest thing for me too was just really realizing that having a food addiction isn't even really about the food. It's it's not even about the food at all. In fact, well, just for the purposes of our discussion, and I have videos that I will link to in the description below where you can go a lot deeper in all of this. But realizing that food addiction is when you use food to distract or numb yourself from an underlying discomfort and dis-ease that when you try to stop doing, you find that you can't. That was such a game changer for me because it stopped being a moral issue. It stopped being a disease, because that was the other thing that I thought too, that, people say that an addiction is a disease. And I discovered that it's really not. It's a dis-ease. It's a separation from the state of ease and comfort that has us going outside of ourselves for an external source of ease and comfort. That's what takes us to food or to alcohol or to shopping or to any of the things that we might reach for outside of us. And just understanding it in that way really, really helped me. And understanding that it's not a disease, it's also not a life sentence. And this is something that I'll talk more about at the end, but this is so, so important because I think that, a huge thing for me and something that I hear actually a lot when I'm talking to other people is that they don't want to admit that they have an addiction because they feel like that's a cop out. They feel like that's a way to not take responsibility for their lives, or it's like putting them in this little box, and that is not what it was for me at all, and here I am 12 years free from my food addiction and my other addictions. And I can tell you right now that it absolutely was like a starting point for me in, really, really reclaiming myself and my life. And it certainly did not put me in a box. It was actually a place for me to get deeper clarity and get really honest with myself. And so, that's what I will say about all of that. And again, I'll talk a little bit more at the end about some thoughts that go into that. But that was the first thing for me. The second thing for me in really knowing that I had a food addiction was learning what it means to have an addiction in body and mind. And this was something that I actually got from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But, understanding that addiction in body means that you experience a loss of control. And so this is the kind of thing, and this was so, so important for me to get. A really important distinction for me to get with this was that it doesn't mean that you always lose control, because that was what I was thinking. I'm like, well, sometimes I don't, sometimes I can just have a portion, or sometimes I, just have one or two cookies and I don't eat, the whole bunch or whatever. And so I would play these little, mind games with myself. I'm like, no, I don't have a problem. But the whole thing is that if you ever lose control, so losing control is like telling yourself, I'm just going to have one. I'm just going to have a portion. I'm just going to have a bite. I'm just going to have a bit of this. And then once you start, something else takes over and you don't want to stop. Like that is, I completely related to that. For me, it's like, I can't even tell you how many times I would be, swing by the store, get the jar of peanut butter because I just had this craving for peanut butter. And then, I had a spoon that I would keep in the middle console of my car just for the purposes of eating peanut butter in my car. And I would tell myself, I'm just going to have a scoop. And then I would have a spoonful. And then as soon as that taste hit my mouth, it was like, well, maybe I'll just have a little bit more. Maybe I just won't have dinner. Maybe I'll just have this for dinner. I mean, it does have protein in it. Like, I would go through all these justifications in my mind, which brings me to the mind part. So the body part, the physical part, is that you experience this loss of control, or you go back to it. You don't stay stopped. So it's like the kind of example where, you swear off sugar. You're like, I'm not going to do this. You do a pantry cleanse. You go on a diet. You're like, I'm clearing this from my body. I'm clearing this from my house. I'm doing on a detox. I'm doing a juice cleanse, whatever it is. You get it completely out of your body. And then a day and a time comes and you find yourself going back to that thing that you swore off. So that's the body aspect of it. The mind aspect of it is that we create these justifications. We create these rationalizations why it's okay in the moment to have it this time. I would have so many justifications like, oh, I deserve this. I worked so hard today. I gave everything to everyone else. I deserve to have a treat. It's just this. It's just this one time. There was just a million justifications and rationalizations that I would have, or telling myself, well, I'm going to get the peanut butter, but I'm just going to have a spoonful and not have any more. Or I'm going to get the cereal and I'm just going to have a bowl, promising myself like that it was going to be different. That was a huge thing for me as well. And so this mindset is like, it's like this delusion that we create in our minds. The other delusion that we create in our minds is telling ourselves that it's going to be different, or telling ourselves that we don't have a problem, that like looking at other people like, oh, that person's really messed up, but I'm not as bad as that. I have better control than that. And so like the mind part tries to tell you that you don't have a problem. So those were the two things, and really understanding the body aspect and the mind aspect of what it means to have an addiction were absolute game changers for me, because it was so obvious for me when I looked at my own experience. I'm like, yeah, I completely relate to this. And so, that was absolutely huge for me. The third thing that had me really realizing that I did indeed have a food addiction was recognizing that there was something deeper going on that was driving me to food. I mentioned a few moments ago that the definition of food addiction is when you use food to distract or numb yourself or self-soothe or whatever from that underlying discomfort and dis-ease, that separation from ease, that feeling of not being okay inside, that when you try to stop doing, you find that you can't. Well, I had to really get honest with myself and recognize that even though I was smiling and positive and looking happy, all the time, I had this low grade irritation or agitation or annoyance or, a huge thing for me was just taking things so personally. Like, it just felt like, I just took things really, really personally. Or just this feeling of not being okay, my eyes opening in the morning before my feet even hit the floor, and I just feel like not okay. That kind of feeling was so important for me to get honest about because I had to really recognize, no, I do have this low grade irritation or agitation going on, this feeling of being disconnected, this feeling of being separate, this feeling of not belonging, this feeling of, you know, just being alone, even if I'm around other people, feeling like I just don't fit with others, and a huge part of that also for me was this constant feeling that whatever I did wasn't enough, and or in other respects feeling like I was just too much, like I was too intense, or I was too serious, or I was too big, or I was too loud. So just never feeling comfortable in my own skin. So that was really, really important for me to get because, I think up until that point, I wanted to make it all about portion control. Like, oh, I just eat too big of portions. And if I can just control my portion sizes, everything will be fine. But as I started to really, understand these critical pieces and get honest with myself, it just became more and more apparent to me like, no, this is not just a portion control issue. There's something deeper going on. And that brings me to the fourth thing that had me really knowing that I had a food addiction, which was that my personality changed around food. I could become really possessive and selfish around food. Like all of a sudden, everything was fine. And then I would be at a party and they would be passing out slices of cake. And if my slice of cake was smaller than somebody else's slice of cake, like I was hyper aware of that. Or if I was at a restaurant and, I ordered the same thing as somebody else and they brought the dishes out and like my piece of fish or my piece of meat was smaller than somebody else's, I wasn't okay with that. I would get irritable and I would hide food so that people couldn't get at my food. I actually preferred to just eat alone. It was just easier for me. I like if I was at a restaurant and or with people and there was like, a bite of dessert left, or there was like a piece of sushi left, or like I couldn't, I would be so hyper aware of that, and I couldn't relax, and I would want it. I would want it for myself. And I think that also tied into this whole idea of, feeling like fearing that I wasn't going to have enough, or fearing that I was going to eat too much sometimes, but also just fearing that there wasn't going to be enough for me. And so that was all wrapped up in it. So there was definitely like I was different around food, and the fifth thing, which kind of, leads from the fourth thing, is that I just was different around food than other people. Like I would be with other people. I remember this boyfriend that I had at the time. We would go to our favorite restaurant and, he would order his favorite meal and I'd order my favorite meal. And like halfway into his meal, he would throw his napkin down on his plate and push his seat back and, and be done. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm full. I'm like, what does that have to do with it? Like it did not occur to me that fullness means that you lose interest in the food. Because I'd be sitting there with like my 11 portion size salad, feeling like, well, this is my plate. I get to eat all of this, even though I was totally full, but it tasted good. So I would just want to keep on eating, right? That was me. And so this idea that fullness would have you lose interest in food was completely foreign concept to me. And, that was one of the big indicators to me that really told me I'm different with food. I can, be at a social gathering and not be present at all because I'm just tracking, when we're going to go eat. I'm tracking like, when do we get to go up to the buffet? Or when is the waiter coming to take our orders? Or when is the waiter going to come back with the food? Or, eyeing the bread bowl on, like the bread basket on the table and like not being able to focus and be present with people because I'd be so preoccupied with the food. I realized that that is not something that people who don't have an addiction with food struggle with. So again, these were the 5 things that really, really helped me to finally get honest with myself that I had a real food addiction. And here's what I want to just say. Again, I know I mentioned this before, but I want to say it again because there's so much, conversation out there about addictions. And I know a lot of people say that addictions are a disease, and I categorically do not agree with that. And as far as I can tell, addiction is a dis-ease. It is a separation from the state of ease and comfort. And frankly, when you can learn how to cultivate an internal and authentic sense of ease and comfort on the inside, which is what I was able to do, you have freedom from addictions. I have freedom from my food addiction, from my drug addiction, from codependency addictions, from busyness addictions, from love addictions, like from so many addictions, because I solved it at the root. I solved it at the root. I solved the real problem. And so the addictions went away because the addictions were the symptoms. And that was a huge, huge thing for me, recognizing that food wasn't my problem. My problem was this underlying feeling of not being okay inside. This underlying discomfort, this underlying dis-ease. Food had been my solution for the underlying problem because food was this external source of ease and comfort. As soon as I solved the original problem, I didn't need to go to the food. The problem just completely went away. And that is why I want to also just really, really underscore this whole idea that having an addiction is not a life sentence. It is not a death sentence, and it's not a life sentence. So you can get free from your addictions. I have freedom from my addictions. I feel like I am a recovered addict, and this is so, so possible. So again, I shared this earlier, but I just want to say that, if you suspect that you might have a food addiction, if you relate to some of the things that I just shared here, I just want to say that instead of seeing this as, like a negative thing that puts you in a box, that makes you feel like you're weak or, like a failure, I really invite for you to see this as the gift that it is. Because what I've experienced is that recognizing that you have an addiction and really fully understanding what that is a starting point. It's a starting point for you to reclaim your life, for you to reclaim your authentic self, for you to actually step into a life of more meaning and fulfillment and love and joy. And that is my greatest wish for you, because that is what I experience here today. And I absolutely see, recognizing that I had an addiction as being a catalyst for all of that. So I hope you got some value here today. Again, I will leave some resources in the description below for other videos that you can check out that can help you get more clarity around, if you do have a food addiction. And I'll just leave some more resources below for you if you want to go deeper, if you want to explore, what getting on your own path of freedom from food might look like. I am so here for you with all of that, and just sending you so much love. Mwah.